Welcome everybody and thank you for joining us. My name is Petra Karlsson and I would like to welcome all of you to this live broadcast with an international audience addressed by Helga Zepp-LaRouche. We have a broad international audience and the webcast will be translated into German, French, Italian and Spanish. And everybody are welcome to send in questions during the procedure, during the next couple of hours. We have dangerous, severe global crisis, but the potential for change in a good direction is also there. In the transatlantic region, we have the danger of immediate hyperinflation. You also have the breakdown of the physical economy that is escalating day by day. Now, on top of that, the situation in Southwest Asia and North Africa is really dramatically turning into something that could quickly lead to a third world war, and that with thermonuclear weapons. Now, many people ask themselves what they can do. How is it possible for me as a single individual to actually intervene into this situation? And I don't know anyone better to address and answer exactly these questions than Helga Zepp-LaRouche herself. She is not only the chairwoman of the German party BÜSO, the civil rights movement in Germany, but she is also the president of the International Schiller Institute. And she has organized for the last 3 or 4 decades internationally for the project Eurasian Land Bridge. She has organized more than hundreds of conferences in Europe, in Asia, internationally, with governmental officials, with diplomats, with professors, people from different institutions. She has also revived the classical tradition in Germany of the German classics. She has in depth studied the great thinker Nicholas of Cusa and also the philosopher Friedrich Schiller. So without further ado, Helga Zepp-LaRouche.
Thank you. Hello, good evening, and good day. We are holding this international webcast to generate an international debate about the situation that there is an alternative to the present policies. And I want to call at this occasion to all the viewers to mobilize for the realization of this alternative, which I'm going to present to you today. What we face as a human civilization is this. We are threatened with the immediate danger of a thermonuclear war, a third world war. If you look in the Middle East, Southwest Asia region, day by day, the tensions around Syria are escalating. There could be a possible attack on Iran by Israel and possibly the United States. Even this is a big fight around the events of the Benghazi American consulates and the growing anti-Western demonstrations around the release of this blasphemic video. Now, the events in Benghazi, the killing of the US Ambassador Stevenson, has been called by Lyndon LaRouche, my husband, a September 11 number 2. Now, if you look at this situation as a totality, it is very clear that the Balkans, that the Middle East has become a new Balkans, where only one more incident could trigger a chain of reactions which could lead to a thermonuclear war on a global scale. If this would happen, it would for sure mean the extinction of civilization. Now, this is not unrelated to the fact that we are in the final phase of the collapse of the financial system of the transatlantic region. Right now, both the European Central Bank and the Federal Reserve have started a a process of hyperinflationary printing of money. And this is threatening that this entire transatlantic region will have very shortly a hyperinflation like it happened in Germany in 1923. Now, if you look at these two combined and interrelated dangers, we have a situation where it is very clear civilization is about to crash against the wall. And we have to have an immediate paradigm shift, and we have to mobilize all possible forces to accomplish that. Now, if you look at the situation in Southwest Asia, it is comparable to the Balkans before World War I, because you have an evolution of conflicts and alliances which tend to have a chain reaction character, and they are almost already out of control. You can say that maybe only one more trigger would be necessary, and the thing is leading to a catastrophe. There is a danger of an Israeli strike against Iran, possibly before the US elections. There are numerous scenarios circulating about a possible breakaway ally scenario where Israel would do something and then draw the United States into it. Prime Minister Netanyahu has repeatedly insisted in the recent period that Iran is about 6 to 7 months away from having the nuclear bomb. Now, that is highly debated. For example, the former one of the former directors of the German National Intelligence, BND, Hans-Dieter Hermann, just recently said that their estimate is that Iran will only have enough nuclear enriched material by the spring of 2013, but then it would take them another 6 months to produce an actual bomb. And that Iran is presently not pursuing a nuclear bomb, but that they want to have a nuclear weapon capability, which is a big difference. Now, if then Iran would leave the nuclear proliferation treaty, they would like to be very rapidly in a position to build a bomb. Now, that's a completely different situation than what is claimed by Prime Minister Netanyahu, and that is also confirmed by the umbrella organization of all US intelligence services, the NIE, who recently confirmed again that they are convinced that Iran is not pursuing a nuclear program, which it discontinued in 2003. Now, there is basically also a massive argument by the US military and even Israeli military and Secret Service former heads and present heads that you can negotiate with Iran. And that also it would be very counterproductive to try to take out the nuclear capacities of Iran, because the blowback would be uncalculable. It would possibly only delay an Iranian program, but then after such an attack, Iran could not be stopped to develop these nuclear weapons. There was recently a report by several retired military and diplomats, among them Scowcroft, Edward Zinni, and others, who warned very strongly against a military strike, and basically saying that this could last to a many year-long war. But such calculations are also sometimes not so predictable, because at the same time there was a war game exercise done by the Saban Center of Mideast Policies of the Brookings Institute, which was reported by David Ignatius yesterday in the Washington Post, which said that any such war could go out of control because the tendency is to misread the signals of the other side, and the potential for a complete escalation obviously is extremely there. Now, this war against Iran, against Syria, would already have happened if it would not have been for the mobilization efforts for war avoidance, especially by Mr. LaRouche, my husband, who warned against the danger of a thermonuclear war coming out of this as early as early November last year, and the head of the Joint Chief of Staff of the US military, General Dempsey, and other American military, who basically have tried to intervene many times. Now, the war against Libya and the killing of Gaddafi is part of this policy of regime change of the British Empire, of which, unfortunately, the present administration has become a part. This is a policy would have already continued against Syria and Iran, and ultimately it is targeting Russia and China. Now, General Dempsey recently intervened again and said that he does not want to be complicit in an attack against Iran, to which Prime Minister Netanyahu immediately said that he got calls from many leaders in the world warning him how dangerous such an attack would be, but that he thinks not to attack would be more dangerous. Now, the military and ex-secret services in Israel are warning that if such an attack would occur, it would put the entire region into flames for 100 years or more to come. Well, it could be that this conflict is almost already out of control. You already have a clash of civilization going on, a war between the Sunni and the Shiites, a war between the Muslims and the Christians, which is all steered by the policies in the final analysis of the British Empire. And what comes to mind at this point is a quote by Friedrich Schiller from his Wallenstein trilogy, the Piccolomini part, Act 5, Scene 1, that it is the curse of the evil deed, that it permanently must regenerate new evil deeds. And where this applies, in my view, is what happened at the Trilateral Commission meeting in 1975 in Tokyo, where not only it was decided to have a policy of the so-called, quote, controlled disintegration of the world economy, a conscious deindustrialization, post-industrial utopian scheme, which was part of the paradigm which is responsible for the present collapse of the transatlantic region. But what was also decided at that point was the policy of the Islamic card against the Soviet Union in the war against Afghanistan. And this led to the creation and support of the Mujahideen in the 10 years from the 80s, leading to the final end or contributing to the end of the Soviet Union. Now, the situation in Afghanistan presently is as lost, if not more lost, for the war partners as it was for the Soviet Union in 1990. Senator McCain, after Republican Congressman Bill Young, the Chair House Appropriations Subcommittee on Defense Chairman, is calling for the immediate withdrawal of US and NATO troops from Afghanistan. McCain said, in light of the killings of US soldiers by trainees, the discontinuation of the training and patrolling, there is no reason to stay. There should be an orderly retreat now. The situation in Afghanistan is completely hopeless. And if you look at the unnecessary death of many soldiers, you can only say this was a terrible war which should never have started. Then you look at the situation in Syria. As part of the regime change policy to overthrow President Assad, who after all is the head of a secular state where you had the peaceful coexistence of all religions, Now, all of a sudden, as part of this regime change policy, he became the dangerous dictator. Now, the German Foreign Minister Westerwelle even expelled the Syrian ambassador, and this despite the fact that it was clear from the beginning, and the proof is that we stated so, and also Mideast experts like Mr. Scholler-Tur and others, it was clear from the beginning that the so-called opposition in Syria was financed and supported by Saudi Arabia, by Qatar, by Libyan mercenaries, by Al-Qaeda forces coming from Iraq. And when President Putin a short while ago said, well, why don't they just open the prison of Guantanamo, release all the prisoners, arm them, and send them to support the rebels in Syria, he hit the nail on the point, because these are the same people the United States is fighting war against in Afghanistan, allied with in Syria, and who in all likelihood had a hand in the killing of the US ambassador in Benghazi. Now, if this policy is coherent, I don't know what is not. Now, the assassination of US Ambassador Stevenson in Benghazi, it was officially said by the Obama administration, was supposed to be the result of a big demonstration getting out of control as a result of protests against this video. But that was absolutely not true. This video, by the way, is a blasphemic piece of filth, which is disgusting, but it had nothing to do with the murder of Ambassador Stevenson. Now, the official American line, promoted in the beginning by President Obama, by Susan Rice, and also Hillary Clinton, was clearly not the full story. And now The Guardian and other papers are having many more details than what Hillary Clinton yesterday presented in a hearing in the Senate. The president of Libya basically, and the police locally, said this had nothing to do with the video, but this was a pre-planned action to do something on the anniversary of September 11th. These were people who came in from Mali, from Algeria, 4 weeks before. And then when there was a hearing in the Senate, Senator Susan Collins contradicted this official line by saying that she got a classified hearing, that the whole thing was pre-planned to occur on 11th September. And that basically, she was totally horrified that there were no Marines to protect the compound, that security had been outsourced to a private British firm linked to the SAS Blue Mountains. And therefore, the whole thing looks a little bit different altogether. And this is why Mr. LaRouche called it September 11 number 2. Now, to shed light on what is really going on, it is very useful to look at a book published by Senator Bob Graham already some time ago, who used to be the U.S. Select Committee on Intelligence, and he chaired the September 11 Joint Congressional Commission on U.S. Intelligence Failures. This book, which has the title Intelligence Matters, the CIA, the FBI, Saudi Arabia, and the Failure of the American War on Terrorism, he expresses his view that the two presidents, George W. Bush and Obama, willfully covered up the role of Saudi Arabia, the royal family, and the Saudi General Intelligence Directorate in the September 11th attacks. That there was a cover-up involving U.S. law enforcement and intelligence agencies. And what angers him particularly is a 28-page chapter of this report, which is still classified. It was classified by President Bush, which pertains to the role of the Saudis, and in particular, the former ambassador, Prince Bandar bin Sultan, in the financing of the attacks. This Prince Bandar, by the way, is today the head of intelligence of Saudi Arabia, and therefore probably not unrelated to what is happening in the region. Now, Senator Graham reportedly tried several times to convince President Obama to declassify this 28-page chapter, which Obama also had promised to the families of the victims of the Twin Tower attack during the election campaign. Now, in these 28 pages, there are also references to the role of the FBI and a possible multi-level cover-up of their involvement in various Saudi operations in the United States, helping and training and financing the hijackers and the pilots of the planes. And for this, just past September 11th, Senator Graham wrote an op-ed in the Huffington Post where he says that the mistrust in the official story of what happened on the September 11th, who financed it and who supported it, is still a matter of national security today, because these networks are still in place. And what the joint inquiry had learned and what has emerged since shows where the proverbial finger of suspicion points. It points to Saudi Arabia, and we need to know the full truth, wrote Senator Graham. Now, the killing of Ambassador Stevenson, September 11th, number 2, was also the issue of a press conference given yesterday by Congressman Walter Jones, Colonel Wilkerson, Bruce Fein, and basically they made very strongly the point that the killing of the ambassador was also the result of the illegal war against Libya and the killing of Gaddafi. Now, the implication of the thesis of Bob Graham are enormous because, well, the war against Afghanistan would not have happened if that thesis would have been investigated, because the Afghanistan war was called for based on Article 5 of NATO. So this war needs to be reinvestigated and ended because it was ill-defined from the beginning. Just yesterday, the Russian ambassador to the United Nations, Shurkin, made a warning saying that the discussion within NATO to maintain permanent military bases in Afghanistan after the soldiers have been withdrawn are very strange and suspicious. He said, if the war on terrorism is winding down in Afghanistan, yet continued military presence is supposed to be there, then the bases are preserved for some other task that is not linked to Afghanistan. And then he also demanded that there must be a report given to the UN Security Council on the results of the existing mandate, and that the mandate only could be continued after a vote and a discussion in the UN Security Council. Now, what other task could the maintenance of military bases in Afghanistan after a withdrawal possibly have? Well, the answer is world empire. Because the real target of all of these developments is Russia and China, who obviously are not part of the British Empire or the Anglo-American British-dominated empire. And therefore, one has to look at the strategic picture as a whole to actually see what is happening. You have the American missile defense system in Eastern Europe, which Obama had promised he would review, but now he's continuing with the policies of President Bush. Now, this Russia totally objects to, understandably, because once this system would be built, it would eliminate the second strike capability of Russia and therefore completely change the strategic balance of nuclear weapons and would equal a capitulation de facto of Russia. Now, the statements by General Staff Chief Makarov that the continuation of the building of this missile system could lead to the use of nuclear weapons in Eastern Europe better be taken serious and not be dismissed as for internal use, as it has been poo-pooed by some people. Because you have to see it together with the encirclement of China, which was escalated by President Obama in his recent trip to Asia end of last year. Japan right now is discussing the abandonment of Article 9 of its constitution, which is part of it. And there is basically a continuous, or there are many new alliances which have only one aim, encirclement of China. Now, there are very serious efforts right now by the US and the Russian military to have a war avoidance policy. But, you know, it is not clear if this will be enough given what is going on. Right now, there is a big maneuver involving 25 nations in the Strait of Hormuz. There just concluded a Russian strategic command post exercise called Kaskas 2012, which was presided over by Joint Chief of Staff Makarov, and which is aimed, among other things, or was aimed at the protection of the southern flank, which obviously would be heavily targeted and involved if there would be an Iranian attack on Iran. Now, if it would come to an escalation in the Middle East, the possibility that it not only would lead to the use of one nuclear weapon, but it is the nature of the war, or danger of war with thermonuclear weapon, that they would be used fully, and that would be the extinction of civilization. Now, Hiroshima, the nuclear bomb in Hiroshima, was a 15 kiloton bomb. One Trident II missile has 8 W-88 warheads, which have 253 times the power of the little boy bomb of Hiroshima. First clip, please. Yes, here you see pictures of maneuvers, which could be those in the Strait of Hormuz. This would be the launching of such a nuclear missile, the blast, a nuclear explosion, the following fire blades forming conditions of complete destruction. Then in the aftermath of that, clouds would prevent the sun to reach the earth. The temperature would probably drop by 7 degrees. You would have a nuclear winter, and there would be probably no human beings and no other species alive after such a blast. Now, this is the immediate danger. This thing could go out of control. And the problem is that this has been building up for a very, very long time. I mean, these deployments and putting into place of capabilities are not something sudden, but this has been building up. The Cold War mentality continued to exist long after the disintegration of the Soviet Union. But the timing of the immediate danger does have eminently to do with the fact that we are seeing now the end phase of the collapse of the transatlantic region, of the Eurozone, but also the dollar zone. You have right now de facto the limitless injection of liquidity in the financial system. For Germany and for Europe and for the world, one can say the date of the September 12th may turn out to be a very fatal date, because this is the day when the Karlsruhe Constitutional Court in Germany basically gave the green light for the European Stability Mechanism, a terrible construction which would give the banking system an unlimited dictatorship if it ever starts to function. They gave the green light for it to go ahead with two small provisions, namely that the German representative in the ESM Governing Council and the German Parliament have to agree if the German contribution in the ESM is supposed to be increased. But that is no reason for consolement, given the fact that Mr. Schäuble is known to want to rush to a United States of Europe in some form as quickly as he can and transfer all sovereignty to the Brussels bureaucracy. And the record of the German Parliament in the recent period is basically that they often did not even read the documentation on which they were voting. Now, in a certain sense, even the ESM decision is terrible. It has been already made obsolete by a similar decision by the European Central Bank 6 days earlier, where they decided that they would from now on limitless buy state bonds of countries in trouble of the Eurozone. Now, this quantitative easing also was announced by Bernanke and the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is presently putting approximately 85 billion per month new liquidity into the system. Now, this is hyperinflationary. Everybody who is not a complete believer in the present predatory system knows that. And I must praise the chairman of the German Bundesbank, Jens Weidmann, who has been standing up in a very courageous way as the only opposing voice in the European Central Bank board. And he recently basically made a huge attack on the EZB by saying an argument which we have said many times, that money as such does not have any value. It's just paper with a print on it. And then, which is laudable for a chief of the Bundesbank, used a literary reference, namely from Goethe's Faust, Part 2, where Mephisto in the story makes a deal with the bankrupt emperor, promising him limitless money. And first it seems to help, but then soon the resulting inflation is destroying the financial system and the state. And Goethe, which is also interesting, describes the creation of inflationary money as a continuation of the policy of alchemy, where people tried to make gold out of lead. In modern times, it's the same thing when you are trying to make money out of paper or out of electronics, because nowadays, you can push the delete button in a computer and all this virtual money would disappear without much consequence. Now, Weidmann basically said the method by central banks to create money out of nothing is something mystical, almost dreamlike, but maybe more nightmare-like. Weidmann then said that the central bankers manage a public good and therefore they need to justify themselves publicly. And then he called for a public debate on the policy of the European Central Bank. And that was also an announcement by the Karlsruhe Constitutional Court that they will hold a hearing in a few weeks on the policy and role of the European Central Bank. Now, the reason why this issue is especially hot in Germany is because we had the experience of the hyperinflation in 1923. And we all have, from stories from our families or from studying history books, the experience that hyperinflation is the most brutal form of expropriation. When people think they have a life saving, they have a secured pension, they have some money in the bank for their old days, well, then soon you realize you have to pay whatever you thought your life work was for one piece of bread, because that's what happened in 1923. Now today there are approximately maybe 1.5 to 2 quadrillion outstanding derivative contracts there. Maybe more, because nobody knows, because there is no transparency. You have the shadow banking, but we are talking about quadrillions. Now, if you try to refinance that, as it has been happening essentially since 2007, but especially since 2008, through one bailout package after the other, you end up with that kind of hyperinflation, except this time not in one country, but in the entire transatlantic region. Now, in Germany, there is a huge fear about that. And there are now, even in the mainstream media, tons of articles appearing which were the 56 worst hyperinflations in history. Now, number one was Hungary between August 45 and July 1946, where you had 207% daily inflation. During the French Revolution, you had 204% per month. In 1923, which was one of the five worst inflations, a daily inflation of 20.9%, and every 4 days the doubling of the price. In the end, many people used the paper money coming as money from the printer to fire their stove directly, because it would be more efficient than to buy wood, which would have doubled its price, and therefore people burned it directly. And after the whole thing was over in December 1923, people used these money notes as wallpaper, because it was the cheapest paper to be had. Now, Zimbabwe in 2008, a daily inflation of 98%. Every 25 hours the price was doubling. And even the banks, Deutsche Bank and others, are now saying, oh yes, the price for saving the euro is inflation. Now, what is not yet settled is how fast this will happen and how quick. Well, I can tell you, very fast. Can we see, please, the triple curve? Because what you have is, while you have this tremendous inflation in the financial aggregates, this is the upper green curve, you have a complete collapse of the physical economy, which is the downward directed blue curve. For example, in Italy, the annual collapse of industrial production right now is minus 7.5%. Spain, minus 4.4%, 5.4%. Greece, minus 5.3%. In July, however, minus 7.8%. France, minus 3.3%. And even Germany, who is supposed to pay for all of this, had a shrinkage of its industrial production of 1.7%. The worst figure is the collapse of the durable consumer goods in Italy by 10%, and that is also directly the result of Mario Monti's property tax for real estate, which means now households cannot buy any more cars or domestic appliances, TVs, and so forth. Now, the central bankers are doing this obviously without having any respect for the effect on the social life, on the economy, because the real economy is collapsing at a very fast rate. The Greek economy has contracted since 2008 by 25%. This will be until the end of next year, according to official data. This has led to a complete desperation. The suicide rates have gone up. The reduction of life expectancy. In essence, there are no more hospitals where children can be treated for heart problems. In Spain, the youth unemployment is by now 55% average. In Andalusia, 70%. For many children in Spain, the only kind of meal they get is the one meal they get financed by the school. So the so-called success story of Portugal, which was long hailed by the EU as fulfilling all the austerity policies of the Troika, they had now over the weekend, last weekend, a mass demonstration of 1 million people in the streets of Portugal in 40 cities, and people were yelling, "Hunger, hunger." Now, the fury of desperation obviously is especially strong among the young generation, which under these circumstances has no future in their own country nor in the rest of Europe. Now, for Portugal, a small country, 1 million people in the street, that is the equivalent as if you would have 30 million in the street in the United States. And just remember, the 1 million march in Washington was a little bit more than 1 million, or at most 2 million. Now, the situation for the young people in Portugal, Spain, most of Italy, Greece, but also increasingly many other countries, is just horrible. There is no perspective. With the programs of the EU right now, young people in Portugal and Spain go on the street and say, what are we supposed to be? A country of waiters, only living from tourism? Now, this thing will explode in this coming weeks. In Spain, for the 25th of September, they have announced the next major action, calling on to surround the parliament, take it over. There is a call by the Public Power Corporation Labor Union on their fellow unionists to bring Greece also to a standstill, to force the government to abandon the presently implemented austerity measures. They also call for taking over the ministries and public buildings. The Spanish Bishop of the Armed Forces, Januario Torgal, warned this government will leave streets behind which will be covered by corpses. Now, in light of this, the proposal of so-called economist Stiglitz that Spain should stay in the euro because the price of leaving it would be too high can only be regarded as utterly incompetent. The idea of creating a banking union, which he also advertises, and mutualization of the debt is also hyperinflationary. And then he blames Germany of being responsible for the present crisis. Now, I can only reject this entirely because the German population is equally the victim of this present policy. More to the point was Argentine President Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner, who in August reminded people of a speech of her late husband, Nestor Kirchner, in front of the UN General Assembly in 2003, who warned at the time that the dead cannot pay their debt. Now, we are today in Europe at a point which reminds you of Friedrich Schiller's remarks in Don Carlos, where Marquis von Posa accuses Prince Philip that his policy for Spain is only bringing the peace of a graveyard. Now, that is the danger of all of Europe. Now, all these proposals which are on the table right now, the European Stability Mechanism as a permanent bailout fund, a banking union, a mutualization of the debt, Eurobonds, a United States of Europe, all of this will not function because simply there is no European people. We have minimum 27 nations, 27 histories, languages, and nobody in Europe, except of a minor bureaucracy and some people who profit from the present system, do regard themselves as a European nation. We are not. This again is the curse of the evil deed which permanently gives rebirth to more evil. Namely, when the euro was enforced on Europe, especially on Germany, as a price for German unification. and it was the geopolitical aim to turn Europe into the junior partner of the Anglo-American Empire at the time. And remember that Amato, who was one of the architects of the Lisbon Treaty, or rather the reformulation of the European Constitution to become only a treaty because it was flatly voted no by the French and the Dutch populations, had actually said, why not go back to the Middle Ages? You know, feudalism was such a beautiful thing. And that is exactly what the present policy of the EU represents. Now, this is not acceptable. And the alternative does exist. It is easy, relatively easy, but it requires the political will. What needs to be done as an absolute first step is the reintroduction of Glass-Steagall in the tradition of Franklin D. Roosevelt. A complete separation of the banks, commercial banks and investment banks, and the commercial banks have to be put under the state protection to be able to give credits to the real economy. The investment banks must bring their books in order without having access to the assets of the commercial banks or being financed by taxpayer money. If they have to close their books or close their bank, well, that is too bad, but not a disaster. Now, the next step has to be, and Glass-Steagall right now is fortunately everywhere in discussion. There is the Capture bill in the United States. There is a debate in almost every European country for Glass-Steagall. And therefore, it could be put on the table immediately. And we have to fight for it. And I'm asking all of you viewers, fight for the implementation of Glass-Steagall, preferably this month, because this is the best war avoidance policy you can have. Secondly, we have to cancel all the EU treaties from Maastricht to Lisbon. Now, the argument that this would be a disaster is a complete concoction. Peter Bofinger, one of the five wise guys, today has an article in Die Welt saying a return to the D-Mark would be a catastrophe. Now, I doubt that Mr. Bofinger is really competent to judge that, because until very recently he did not even acknowledge that we have a systemic crisis of the system. And why should you listen to economists who did not foresee the crisis concerning their advice what should be done now? Now, Europe existed and functioned very well before the Maastricht Treaty. And we need to have sovereignty over our own currency. We need to have a new D-Mark, a new Drachme, a new Lira, etc. Simply because that is the only way how countries can fulfill and how states and governments can fulfill their oath to protect the common good. Now, we need, and fortunately the Karlsruhe ruling from the 12th of September, the last paragraph had a clear reference to which international laws apply in case a country wants to leave the European Monetary Union and return to their national control over currency and economy. Then we need, as part of this package, an immediate implementation of fixed exchange rates. Now, this is important because we have to prevent speculators like George Soros to make billions in a week by speculating against the life work or work of decades of nations. Then we need to have a credit system. We have to replace the present bankrupt monetary system with a credit system in the tradition of Alexander Hamilton, the National Bank he created, or also the Kreditanstalt für Wiederaufbau in the reconstruction of Germany, which after all used the principles of Roosevelt's Reconstruction Finance Corporation to turn Germany in a few years from a rubble field into the famous German economic miracle. Now, a credit system is something contrary to a monetary system where you create money to pay debt, old debt of the past. In a credit system, the state issues credit towards future production. And in every case where this has been done internationally, like in the Franklin D. Roosevelt period, like in the post-war reconstruction of Germany, it can be proven that because of the impulse to the primary and secondary impulse to the real economy, the tax revenue after a few years is always much higher than the initial credit given. And that has everything to do with the power of human labor to create more wealth, to generate added value, to implement the results of scientific and technological progress in the form of technology which increases the productivity in the production process. And therefore, this kind of money generation is not inflationary. It is not the same kind of money creation like what is being done by the central banks right now. Now, this was done by Roosevelt. This is how he got the United States out of the Depression. And in Germany, in the beginning of the 30s, there were similar proposals, the famous Lautenbach Plan, which was more or less the same like Roosevelt's New Deal. There was a plan by the General Trade Union Organization, the ADGB, which was called the WTB Plan. All of these plans basically said the state has to create credit to eliminate unemployment, to create productive jobs, and basically by providing for productive full employment, you eliminate the conditions of the crisis and you eliminate the cost of unemployment, you generate the wealth for sustained maintenance of society. Unfortunately, as we know, the Lautenbach Plan and the WTB Plan were not implemented. If they had been implemented in 1931, in 1933, the conditions which allowed Hitler to come to power would have been eliminated. So we better learn the lesson of this now and turn away from the utterly disgusting Brüning policy of austerity, which is being implemented by the Troika right now. Now, the concrete focus of such a change in the financial system is a plan which we have presented a couple of months ago. It's called the Plan for the Reconstruction of the Southern Europe, the Mediterranean, and Africa. Now, can we have that clip, please? Now, this is the World Land Bridge. This is an idea which we have proposed since the collapse of the Soviet Union, which has been expanded into a worldwide connection of infrastructure projects, of large water management projects like Navapa, like the Transaqua system. And it would basically mean to provide the entire world with the necessary infrastructure, which presently only some countries enjoy, like Germany, which has a very well functioning infrastructure. Now, this is the extension into the Balkans. This is connecting the Rhine-Main-Donau water system of Europe with canals and river systems to the Mediterranean. It means building some of the, this is now the connection of the bridge of Messina between Italy and Sicily, and then a tunnel between Sicily and Tunisia, where a tunnel will be built with 5 artificial islands, so that basically you could connect the European transport system with Africa. Another very important project is the connection of the street through tunnel under the Strait of Gibraltar, and this is the so-called Africa Pass, connecting the water, the amounts of water from the Congo region through a canal system all the way to the Mediterranean, where you could develop agriculture, where presently is only desert. And in connection with the Trans-Aqua project, this would begin to transform Africa completely, eliminate hunger and starvation and diseases in a very short period of time. Now, this project, can you please just have a still picture of the World Land Bridge? This project for Europe, for Southern Europe, the Mediterranean and Africa is not all that revolutionary. Some parts of it are, like a science driver component by building a space station in the Canary Island, by having a science center in Essence. But most of the projects, including the development corridors into the Balkans, into the south of Italy, into the Iberian Peninsula, are all projects which were already agreed upon by the EU transport ministers at a conference in Crete in 1994. They decided on 10 priority corridors, which 5 of this would have gone into the Balkans, into Greece, others into Italy and Spain and Portugal. And they essentially, except very tiny components of it, have never been built, mainly because of the crisis which then erupted and the austerity programs, but also because there was this paradigm shift very much to the green ideology, which is right now controlling the guidelines of the European Union. Now, these programs we presented in another webcast earlier. You can find it here in the archive on this webpage. So I do not want to repeat all the arguments from that. You also find the written report, which we are translating right now into all relevant languages. But this program could be started tomorrow. It would give a vision for Spain, for Portugal, for Italy, for the Mediterranean, for Africa, and it would absolutely change the entire dynamic. But I have to say one provision. You cannot be intimidated by the green ideology, because how can you survive as a country if you don't produce anything? How can you survive without having a perspective for the young generation and the generations which come after that? Now, the green paradigm is part of the present oligarchical model, which unfortunately has been imposed in the form of the EU on Europe, and it has the idea of reducing the population. It is absolutely not consistent with the real laws of the universe. And the proof of that is that the Royal Society in their annual report this year openly said that they want to reduce the world population to 1.5 billion people. Now, the green paradigm, which was introduced as part of the global paradigm shift at the end of the 60s, beginning of the 70s, like the thesis of the Club of Rome, that the world has now reached a limit, that you have to have limits of resources. Because you have supposedly limits of resources, you have to have sustainable development, appropriate technology, all code words for no technology, does not correspond to the real universe. The real universe is an anti-entropic developing universe, which always provides for new resources, provided man is using his creative power to determine, through scientific and technological progress, what are the new resources. Now, the world population right now is 7 billion people. And, we could easily feed these people and many more. There are many projects to, make life better on this planet. Now, do you think that the condition of Africa is a natural phenomenon, do you think it is like that because the people in Africa do not want to develop? No, the aim of the oligarchy is to reduce the world population to 1 or 2 billion people, as Prince Philip has said many times, as many other people like Schellenhuber in Germany, who wants to have a 1 billion population. And they want to turn Europe into a feudal society. I already mentioned Amato, who has basically praised the Middle Ages, but I think that that is not the road to go, because this will lead to a terrible, terrible social explosion this month, next month, and the collapse of society. Now, we have provided the outlines of a recovery program because it is not enough to be against the austerity imposed by the Troika right now. But we have to have a positive vision of what we want Europe to look like. I want to have a Europe of sovereign nation states, of a revival of the high periods of classical culture, like the ancient Greek classical culture, like the Andalusian Renaissance in Spain, like the Italian Renaissance of the 15th century, and use that high level, or the German classical period, and use that to create something new for all of mankind. And I'm calling upon everybody who is watching this webcast to help us to mobilize for that mission. Because I think all which is necessary right now is to inspire the population that such an alternative exists. Now, we have to do a couple of other things. We have to change the paradigm of thinking completely. Because if we stay in the present paradigm of present geopolitical politics, of the transatlantic region, of the programmed conflict with Russia and China, it is very clear civilization is probably going the way the dinosaurs went approximately 65 million years ago. There are fortunately thinking people who realize that we need to change something. And I want to mention the Euro-Atlantic Security Initiative, EASY, which has been presented this February of this year by former Senator Sam Nunn, the present head of the Munich Security Conference, Wolfgang Ischinger, and the Russian Igor Ivanov, because they obviously also realize that the present Cold War thinking is having the explosive potential for a catastrophe. They denounce this Cold War thinking. They call for an inclusive, undivided, functioning Euro-Atlantic security community where all disputes should be solved by diplomatic, legal, or other non-violent means, without ever the recourse to military force. They also want to have a demilitarization of the relation between the United States, NATO, and Russia. And they say that if such a treaty or alliance would be adopted, this would be a complete game changer. And indeed, that is what we need, a game changer. But even better and even more reaching into the future is another proposal which was presented by the former Russian ambassador to NATO, Rogozin, who is now one of the vice prime ministers, who made the proposal of the so-called strategic defense of the Earth. Now, this is a conception of collaboration among nations of the world, very much an extension and in the tradition of the SDI proposal, which my husband made and which President Reagan announced as the official American policy in 1983. Now, what this focuses on is, among other things, the very much live and existing danger of a serious asteroid impact, which could be as devastating to civilization as a nuclear war. And, you know, those people who think that this is esoteric and why should I be concerned about comets and asteroids, you better go to the web pages of NASA and of the ESA, and look that there are indeed many, many such asteroids with a trajectory either towards Earth or maybe towards Earth, and that there is right now a massive increase of such activity, which has to do with the cyclical developments of the position of our planet in the galaxy. Therefore, the idea that one does not have to prepare for this possibility of an impact is a dangerous folly. Now, can we go back to the pictures? First, the asteroid comet size statistics. No, the statistics. Yes. Now here you see what is the impact of asteroids or comets. For example, if you have an asteroid of 30-meter diameter, this would be a minor damage relatively. 50-meter diameter already would be comparable to the largest thermonuclear weapon in existence. But if you go to the possibility of a comet of 10,000 meter diameter, this would have energy released of 80 million megatons TNT. And that would be the complete extinction of the human species. Now, such things did happen in the past. If you look at the so-called Tunguska event, which happened in 1908, and it hit an area of 2,150 square kilometers in Siberia. And on the right side, you see the equivalent area if such an impact would occur in New York City. It would eliminate quite an area. Now, please have the comparison of the Mount Everest and such an asteroid. Now here you can see Mount Everest having 8,848 kilometers, and compared to one large asteroid of 10,000 kilometers. I mean, just imagine if Mount Everest would hit with a velocity of many kilometers, it would blast the Earth out of the water. Now look at the last 500 million years. Now this has happened repeatedly, and it many times was related to the so-called big extinctions, the last which occurred approximately 65 million years ago, where up to 98% of all species got eliminated. So I mean, this is a very real danger, and presently we are, as a civilization, not equipped to do anything about it. But if we have the ambition to be smarter than the dinosaurs, we better start to invest massively in manned space travel, in the kind of research which would enable us to detect the trajectory of such objects. And, well, I mean, basically, therefore, the proposal of the SDE should be put on the table for serious. Now, this all requires a complete change in the self-conception of man. We have to stop being infants. We have to stop thinking that we should have geopolitical wars for raw materials, for power, for all kinds of things. And we have to make that jump to concentrate on the common aims of mankind instead. Now, this involves the common mastery of new scientific principles. We have to consciously start the next phase of the evolution of mankind. If you go to the writings of the German former scientist, later American German scientist Kraft Ericke, who called manned space travel the absolutely necessary next phase of evolution of mankind. That life developed out of the oceans on the planet, on the ground. Then man conquered the planet through infrastructure development. And now manned space travel is the next phase of the evolution of mankind. And in order to make sure that civilization will be an eternal civilization and not have the same fate like previous species which got wiped out, we better start to rethink who man is in the universe. Kraft Erika, who was a dear friend of mine and of our organization, used to call it the extraterrestrial imperative, meaning that man consciously starts to explore the galaxy, consciously becomes rational by only acting on scientific principle and not on popular opinion or other such positivist conceptions. And I think we have come a big step closer to this point with the absolutely exciting landing of the Mars rover Curiosity, where now basically the first step of mankind into the near galaxy has been accomplished, because now not only was the first voice human voice to be heard from Mars in the form of a transmission of the commander of the space station on Earth, but we have now senses. We can hear, see, smell on Mars, but with a difference of about 14 minutes and transmitted by the speed of light. So the Curiosity landing gives you a pre-taste of where mankind can go, that we indeed are at the beginning of a new epoch. Now, Kraft Erika, who was a fantastic human being, also said, and he was one of the leading space scientists, he said, despite the fact that he developed the Saturn rocket of the Apollo project and many other things, he said a technology is never good or bad. It is always man who either brings this technology for a good purpose or for an evil one. And therefore, towards the end of his life, he agreed with us in saying that the aesthetical education of man must go along with the scientific development. Now, I totally believe that that is possible, and that if we do that, then not only can we deter the present dangers, but we can start a new phase of mankind. Now, the reason why I'm, despite all the existing dangers, so optimistic that it is possible has to do with the thinking of such people as Nicolaus of Cues and Johannes Kepler, who Johannes Kepler, while studying the stars, came to the conclusion that the universe is so full of beauty that it clearly reflects in its lawfulness a loving creator, and that if we do our job right now and act in the image of that creator, I think that we have reached a punctum saliens in mankind's history where we can make the jump so that mankind finally can become adult.